Good day, everyone, and welcome to this live WTO event. Today, we celebrate International Women's Day. It has become a milestone event in the WTO's life because gender is now an integral part of its work. But it is not a routine celebration. This year, more than any other, it is important to mark this day. First, because of the economic and social disaster lived by millions of women across the globe due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Second, because I believe the WTO is transforming and growing into a gender-responsive organization. Two recent events demonstrate that. Last September, an informal working group on trade and gender was established in the WTO, integrating the issue into the organization. The three co-chairs of this group are participating in this panel discussion today. Also, and as importantly, I have here with me the new Director General of the WTO, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. She bears testimony of the progress accomplished and how gender has become integral to the WTO. Today, we will talk about women in leadership, achieving an equal future in a COVID-19 world, and what are the recovery pathways for women. To discuss these issues, we have 5 distinguished panelists. We have Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, the Director General of the WTO. We have Dr. Atalia Lesiba Molokome. She is the Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Botswana to the WTO. We have Ms. Anna Patricia Benedetti Zelaya. She is the Ambassador and Permanent Representative of El Salvador to the WTO. And we have Mr. Harold Haspelund. He is the Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Iceland to the WTO. Last but not least, we have Ms. Shinta Widjaja Kamdani. She is one of the executive board members of the International Chamber of Commerce, CEO of Sintesa Group, Vice Chairwoman of the Indonesian Chamber of Commerce and Industry. So thank you all for being here today with us. Before we start, some housekeeping recommendations. We will have time for questions after the discussion. We will be taking them from the audience via all platforms. Just submit your questions in writing on the platform you are watching us in, and our team will collect them and send them to me. Please make sure that you identify yourself and where you are from, otherwise we will not take your question. Now that this point has been clarified, let me start the discussion and give the floor to the WTO Director General for her opening remarks. DG, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Anush, and thank you for the good work you're helping us with here at the WTO. I want to say good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and happy International Women's Day. I'd like to start right off the bat by paying tribute to their excellencies, the ambassadors of Botswana, El Salvador, and Iceland, who are with us today, for their pioneering work on women and trade and gender within the WTO. Anush spoke about this as one of the ways we're beginning to integrate the gender aspects of trade, which, as everybody will know, are very close to my heart, since I've spoken of them repeatedly, even during the time I was being interviewed for the job. I think that trade is one of the ways we can try to help lift up marginalized populations, help women, help be more inclusive. So this morning, I'd like to start off by saying that today is my first International Women's Day as WTO Director General. And given the particular challenges the pandemic has brought to women globally, I wish to focus my opening remarks today on what the WTO can do to help address these challenges. But I'm also keenly aware that achieving gender equality is one of the top priorities for the Secretariat itself. And I just want staff to know that today, because we are focusing on the pandemic, doesn't mean that I'm not aware. I intend to work on those issues and address the issues with them as we move forward. So we'll have other occasions to focus on gender equality within the Secretariat. So how has the COVID-19 pandemic affected women? The COVID-19 pandemic has deepened inequalities of every kind between countries with money to spend on vaccines and economic relief and those that cannot, between workers who must risk their health every day and those who can work safely from home, between big firms and small businesses. But perhaps no divide has deepened more than that between men and women. In both paid and unpaid work, women bore the brunt of the pandemic's social and economic impact. Globally, 5% of women lost jobs in 2020. The employment loss of men was 3.8%. Women have also been much more likely than men to drop out of the labor market and become inactive. In low-income countries without the means to offer economic support during lockdowns, many women lost their only source of income, being daily workers. As family incomes fell, many girls also stayed at home when schools reopened or went to work. Why has the recession caused by the pandemic had such a disproportionate impact on women? First, women are overrepresented in sectors that have been more negatively affected than others. These include jobs requiring in-person contact, such as food service and retail sectors that either shut down or became much riskier. Women also account for a large share of workers in services such as tourism sectors directly affected by travel restrictions. Women also outnumber men in the manufacturing sectors hardest hit by the pandemic, such as textiles and apparel, where factories shut down early in the pandemic in response to plummeting export demand. In Bangladesh, for example, female employees represent 80% of the workforce in the ready-made garment production. Industry orders declined by 45.8% over the first quarter of 2020, by 81% in April 2020 alone, a huge number. Second, more women work in informal sectors than men. Women make up 58% of employment in the informal sector, and the numbers are higher in developing and least developed economies. In Africa, for example, almost 90% of employed women work in the informal sector. These women workers are hurt the most because, like I mentioned earlier, they are likely to have lost their only source of income and are left with little social or legal protection. Third, many women entrepreneurs own or manage small businesses that already struggle with limited financial resources and borrowing capacity. The pandemic worsened these pressures. And within families, women continue to shoulder a heavier burden than men. Temporary school closures made fathers step up a bit, so they did step up. But mothers stepped up much more. Working mothers changed work schedules, reduced hours, or took unpaid leave far more frequently than working fathers. In Germany, 6% of fathers, but 62% of mothers indicate that they have taken on the primary responsibility for their children during school closures. Finally, women face greater health risks as they work more in areas such as health and social care, sales of food, and other necessary goods. In many countries, women comprise over 75% of the healthcare workforce. In certain countries, Italy, Spain, and the US, a higher proportion of women healthcare workers, respectively 69%, 75% and 73%, very high numbers, were found infected with COVID-19. Although work is still ongoing as to why a higher proportion of women health workers in these countries were infected, one possible reason that is being given is that personal protective equipment was designed to fit more for men, and even some smaller sizes were too big for women, so they were not as well protected by this gear as the men. But there is ongoing work to see why this is happening. So what can the WTO contribute to address the impact of the pandemic on women? Even before COVID-19, progress towards gender parity had been too slow, too uneven. Now, unless we act quickly, the pandemic's disproportionate impact on women could last for decades. This could be a moral failure and an economic disaster. The biggest thing the WTO can do right now is to work with members to keep trade open. As the economic data shows, trade has proven crucial in the global fight against the pandemic. Whilst there's still so much more to do, and this is what we are fighting to implement now, because far too many restrictions remain in place, it is true that trade has helped improve access to key medical products over the past year. In the first half of 2020, while global trade contracted by 14% compared to the year before, total imports of personal protective equipment and other COVID-related products rose by 29%. The value of trade in textile face masks grew sixfold. PPE trade grew by 50%. Trade thus enhanced supply resilience, particularly for those countries with no supply or manufacturing capacity. The pandemic has also highlighted how the temporary movement of healthcare workers, of whom many are women, has particularly helped the most affected countries to deal with the crisis. Open trade will continue to be key to building faster and more inclusive growth. Second, WTO members must minimize or remove existing export restrictions that are impeding access to essential medical supplies and disrupting supply chains. Transparency on any export trade restrictions should also be improved, even though we have some ways to go to look at how trade can contribute to solutions for the COVID-19 pandemic, because we still have too many export restrictions in place. It is true that trade has helped improve access to key medical products over the past year. In the first half of 2020, while global trade contracted by 14% compared to the year before, total imports of personal protective equipment and other COVID-19 related products rose by 29%. The value of trade in textile face masks grew sixfold. PPE trade grew by 50%. Trade thus enhanced supply resiliency, particularly for those countries that don't manufacture. The pandemic has also highlighted how the temporary movement of healthcare workers, of whom many are women, has particularly helped the most affected countries to deal with the crisis. Open trade will continue to be key to building faster and more inclusive growth. Second, WTO members must minimize or remove existing export restrictions that are impeding access to essential medical supplies and disrupting supply chains. Transparency on any export trade restriction should also be improved through prompt notifications. In all these efforts, our priority should be to contribute to making vaccines available and affordable in all countries, as well as therapeutics and diagnostics. Until we have successfully tackled health challenges for everyone, we cannot tackle economic ones. Third, trade can be a source of more and better jobs and increased purchasing power for women. Overall, countries that are more open to trade, as measured by the ratio of trade to gross domestic product, have higher levels of gender equality. For one, women are more likely to be in formal jobs if they work in trade-integrated sectors with higher level of exports, thereby giving them opportunities for benefits, training, and job security. A recent World Bank survey shows that for women, the probability of being informal declines from 20% in sectors with low levels of export to 13% in sectors with high levels of exports. Digital technologies can also help women overcome gender-based barriers to trade, reach broader markets, and weather the impact of crisis better. Women producing face masks in Kenya, for example, found ways to develop and even expand their businesses during lockdowns using growing e-commerce opportunities, while Rwandan women selling coffee prior to the pandemic were able to sell directly to customers in China, earning $4 more per ton than they would have outside of if they had used normal channels. So let's close the existing gender digital divide and help all women benefit from the opportunities created by digital technologies. Finally, all these efforts must be supported by targeted support measures for women. Women could be left behind in the recovery unless adequate measures are put in place to address the uneven impact of the pandemic on them. Let me give you one example of how targeted intervention can make a difference. In Zambia, the Enhanced Integrated Framework and International Trade Center helped women-owned businesses selling textiles, leather, and honey to attend trade fairs and other business-to-business activities. The result? They were able to break into 10 new international markets and generate hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of new sales. They also expanded their supplier networks. Many of these new suppliers were also run by women. Governments need to prioritize women in the labor force and in the home through financial, legal, and educational measures. Fiscal support for women will be particularly crucial. Yet, currently, less than 40% of all measures taken globally for the recovery are gender sensitive, with only 7% containing measures supporting women's economic security. This is a crude reminder for all of us that women must be at all decision-making tables equally as men. As Graça Machel put it, socio-economic transformation will only be realized once we aggressively address gender-specific challenges, prioritize gender equality and women's participation, and firmly entrench women in leadership positions at all levels of society. The cost of gender inequality is enormous. A few years ago, McKinsey estimated that if women played a fully equal role to men in the labor market, global economic output could increase by as much as $28 trillion per year. To put it in perspective, this pandemic reduced global output last year by between $3 and $4 trillion. The COVID-19 pandemic is setting women back in all domains of society. At the same time, it has reminded everyone of the enormous value of care and other kinds of work traditionally associated with women, and it has highlighted the power and effectiveness of women's leadership. Although we are still analyzing and trying to get data for this, anecdotal examples show that countries led by women have outperformed their peers in terms of management of this pandemic. For example, New Zealand, Denmark, Chinese Taipei, Iceland, Finland, and Norway. We cannot expect to make good policy for all members of society if half of the population is not properly and equally represented at the table. Gender equality is a fundamental human rights issue, but gender equality is also an economics issue, an economic empowerment issue. We should all work harder in our respective roles to achieve complete gender equality. I wish you all a happy International Women's Day. Thank you.
Thank you, Director General. So now we will go to a would like to engage with all the speakers and would like to give them the floor to briefly give their opening remarks for 2 minutes. And I will go first with Ambassador Aspelund. Ambassador, you have the floor. In your statement, can you also include a little bit about the work that you're doing as part of the informal working group on trade and gender in the WTO? Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for giving me the floor. Good morning and happy International Women's Day. I'm really happy to be here in the podium on this important day with the new Director General. As the Director General has already explained so very well, the pandemic has hit women the hardest as they work in the most sectors that have been hit the worst, and especially the informal sector, where most women are employed. And for that reason, we can say, especially now in this crisis, that women's economic empowerment is a development and growth stimulus. And for that reason, the work that we are doing here now at the WTO is even more important. Maybe I run through a bit then through what we are doing in the group and the background for our work. I would say in the last 3 years, the WTO has changed. It has grown from a gender-unaware organization to a gender-responsive one. The 2017 Buenos Aires Declaration and the momentum it created, I was there myself, and it was quite a momentum. The event that we organized to launch it became very chaotic with a great interest from the media and the public, and I was very proud of that moment, and a moment I will never forget. And it was a milestone, definitely, in our work on trade and gender. And under that umbrella, the members of the WTO laid down the grounds for the current work. Since then, we have identified and explored 32 best practices on trade and gender, ranging from data collection methods to impact assessment of trade agreements, government procurement policies, and financial inclusion tools for women's entrepreneurs. The declaration has also been a catalyst for some members to increasingly and voluntarily report on their trade and gender measures as part of their trade policy review processes. And since 2018, more than 48% of WTO members under the review have voluntarily included information on their gender-responsive trade policies in their government reports. And as a chair of the Trade Policy Review body, I have personally witnessed this change very clearly. Last September, taking the work further, the 127 proponents of the declaration established the informal working group on trade and gender at the WTO, especially looking at how to concretely apply the gender lens to WTO and international trade. And this was a very important new step to the right direction. A lot can be achieved as a part of this collaborative, and open and transparent effort can especially respond to the needs of women. At the WTO, based on the biennial technical assistance and training plan 2018 to 2019, adopted by members, the Secretariat created a new training module on trade and gender. It was launched on 8th of March 2019, a year ago, and 17 courses were dispensed since then as part of the WTO Trading Institute and Institute's program. And the biennial plan 2020 to 2021 confirmed the integration of gender in the WTO's technical assistance. And looking ahead a bit at the MC12, we are looking at contributing meaningfully and concretely so that women are fully integrated in international trade, and that trade can benefit women as workers and consumers. It is not about, I would like to underline that this is not about new rules. The challenge remains about mainstreaming gender into the full spectrum of the WTO's work so that it becomes a second nature of the organization. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. I would like now to give the floor to Ambassador Molokome of Botswana. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Moderator Anush. Thank you, Anush, Moderator. And I was just saying how delighted I am to be in this panel in the presence of our brand new Director General. And just to say that today, to be celebrating International Women's Day is a truly special occasion. We've celebrated many Women's Days before, but I think this is a particularly important one under the theme, Women in Leadership, Achieving an Equal Future in a COVID-19 World. I know that technology undermined the time that we have left, so I will go very quickly through my statement and summarize everything that I was going to say during the webinar. I think that our Director General has made things very easy for all of us because she had a far-ranging, very comprehensive speech that covered all the bases that basically told us why we should be concerned about women's leadership and why and how we can begin to tackle the challenges posed by COVID-19. She gave us lots of facts and figures. She gave us some ideas of where and how we can go. I mean, that's not a surprise. This is our number crunching DG, our economist and trade specialist and all rounder. So thank you very much, Madam DG. I needn't repeat what you said. We know why the COVID-19 pandemic has affected women disproportionately, developing countries more adversely than developed countries. The reasons are clear. I think you shared them. Power relations, unequal power relations, always exacerbated by any crisis. And I think for women, as you've said, as frontline health workers, I think in Africa, I need to say that they are the backbone. We as women, African women, are the backbone of the agricultural sector. They feed their families and societies. Women trade in various goods in Africa within their communities, domestically, increasingly across borders, not just within Africa, but also outside. So we know why, as the DG has explained, we have had such an adverse impact on women's economic activities and livelihoods during this period. So what do we do? I think clearly we need to have comprehensive provisions or mechanisms, and this has to happen at domestic, at regional, and at global level so that we address the peculiar challenges that women entrepreneurs in particular, because remember, we are trying to empower women through trade, facilitate trade. So women run a lot of small businesses. We want them to scale up their businesses and contribute more meaningfully and benefit from trade, be it regional or global. The WTO, I think my colleague Ambassador Aspeland has shared what we have tried to do at the level of the WTO. Just to summarize, we need to mainstream gender issues into the multilateral trading system. We need to create the institutional frameworks to support this. I'm very happy, Madam DG, that we have our gender focal point, Anush, who's working on these issues. I think that the Buenos Aires Declaration that Ambassador Aspeland referred to was a great start. We are moving forward in implementing it. We have programs like Aid for Trade. We need to implement those, taking cognizance of the gender perspective. We have our joint program with UNCTAD, between WTO and UNCTAD, the ITC, which launched She Trades, the initiative in 2015 that aims to connect 3 million women entrepreneurs to international markets by 2021. And I think it is happening despite COVID. I think they're doing a very good job. The She Trades program, as you know, is led by ministers responsible for trade and not gender ministers as we are used to, because this is a clear recognition that trade policy tools are needed and are effective in empowering women economically, and that the trade ministers are the ones with the mandate to effectively facilitate market access for women entrepreneurs. I think that it is well known that by 2015, She Trades had already mobilized about 1 million women and built the capacity of 300 institutions, enabled the generation of 150 million US dollars in exports. Okay, so that's the global level. We have to come down. We go to the regional level. At Pan-African level, we have our African Continental Free Trade Area, the first landmark flagship program of our Agenda 2063. It provides us with a basis on which we can implement concrete measures to ensure that women can participate meaningfully and benefit from increased intra-African trade, which can greatly improve. When I move to the national level very quickly, we need strong leadership and commitment. In fact, nothing will happen, no change will happen, no matter how we act globally and regionally, if it doesn't happen at the national or domestic level. We need to have explicit gender policies, gender mainstreaming strategies. In my own country, as in many other countries, I know that government has made bold commitments in vision documents and development plans to mainstream gender with a view to contribute to an inclusive society to attain sustainable development. We have national gender policies, institutional frameworks, and so on. And we need to move even further now and say, how do we begin then to concretely make a difference? I think, Ambassador Aspeland, you've already referred to the challenges we faced at the global level. I think at the national level, we need to invest more resources and we need to make sure that we have more women leading, whether they are ministries of trade, the portfolio ministries that make a difference, the economic ministries that our Dr. Ngozi has led, the economics ministries and the trade ministries and so on. So if we have more women leaders, I think clearly the evidence is out there. I don't think it's even anecdotal. I have been involved in research in Southern Africa that shows that when more women lead, there are more decisions that benefit the social welfare sectors, for example, like education, like health, where more budgetary provision is made for issues like that that benefit the whole society and not only one section of society. Let me stop there and maybe give others a chance to say something before the time runs out. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Ambassador. Without further ado, I will give the floor to Ambassador Benedetti Zelaya for her 2 minutes, and then we will go right to questions. I see already a few questions. If you could send them via the chat box, that would be great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anush, and very good morning to everyone. It fills me with great honor and pride to celebrate International Women's Day with this, surrounded by trailblazers and gender champions in this panel. I especially salute you, the Director General. In the midst of the most important international health crisis of our modern times, let's take a moment to celebrate all those wonderful, resilient, and strong women that are striving to overcome the very difficult challenges that we have faced in the past year. In 2020, the WTO and the World Bank published a joint report on how trade is a tool to promote gender equality. This report found that in El Salvador, businesses that engage in international trade employ 66% more women in their workforce than others. During normal times, this would be a fact to celebrate. However, last year was anything but normal. As a cause of the pandemic, these benefits are at risk of being reversed. The arrival of the pandemic has elevated female unemployment in Latin America to 22%, according to ECLAC. As was mentioned by our DG, women work in sectors of the economy that are at high risk of production decline. Their employment conditions are worsening, and the structural knots of inequality have been intensified. Now that we are witnessing the dawn of economic recovery in many parts of the world, including El Salvador, we must not forget that the face of trade in many countries is that of women. It is here where WTO and we as members have an enormous responsibility, and at the same time, an opportunity to help shape the world after the pandemic, achieving concrete results in trade areas that will improve the lives of our population, especially those who are most in need. After the challenges that we have identified and the comments of my two esteemed colleagues regarding the work of the informal group, I would just very briefly like to touch upon the work of the future work of the informal group. In addition of what we have already done, I also consider that a focused approach that will allow us to identify across the board the challenges women are facing with specific WTO agreements. With the help of WTO teams or in collaboration with other international organizations, agreement-specific surveys concerning the obstacles women face in the implementation could be prepared. This information will inform the discussion within our informal group and help tailor specific responses within WTO to overcome the challenges identified. On the other hand, we could encourage members, as it was done in the MSME's informal group, to include a specific section regarding women and trade policies in the TPR. Finally, I would like to stress that the participation in the informal group is open to every member, and we encourage everyone to join and contribute to this important effort. The more members, the better we will be able to shape the responses to the common challenges faced globally on trade and gender. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I think our DG needs to leave very soon. But DG, maybe in 1 second, there is an interesting question, if you have one more second for you. It's about how to incorporate gender perspectives and concerns into policies, into trade policies. Maybe in a few seconds, if you could answer that very important question.
Thank you. In a few seconds, it will take some time to think this through, because if it were easy, we would have been able to do it. But there are certainly opportunities for trying to make sure, first of all, we need information. We don't, I feel like we don't have the kind of gender disaggregated data about women's participation in trade that could help us make a strong economic case. We know it's out there. We know they are particularly strong in SMEs. So first and foremost, I think policy-wise, we need to collect information, and that's what I'd urge every government to try to do that through the National Statistical or other kinds of offices. I think to incorporate women more strongly in supply chains, we also need to look at investing in them more. And really, access to finance, we all know, is a problem, but also access to marketing skills, that's also a problem. Access to, just general managerial skills also. Speaking to many women entrepreneurs, some of them, when they want to move from one size of enterprise to another, often don't have the skills they need when they are doing well. Surprisingly, when they're having success in business, they need the skills to move to the next level. So looking at how we can integrate policy-wise these kinds of help into what we're doing is very, very important. We now have policies to support SMEs, so we could have special policies to support SMEs led by women. And finally, on the budget, when I was Minister of Finance, I realized that if we are going to mainstream gender into all that we do, the budget is a very powerful instrument. So what we did with policies to say to each minister, there would be an incentive system with additional budget for all those willing to translate their words into action with regard to women's empowerment. And so for trade, if we approach this also, how do we incentivize all those who can make stronger policies that integrate women into the mainstream of trade? So these are the types of policies I think we need to look at all along the value chain: investment, capacity training, connecting women to markets. So thank you. I'm so sorry I have to leave for another meeting. Okay, bye-bye.
So we will let the DG go. And now I think we will continue the conversation for a few minutes. And I would like to have the voice of the private sector in this conversation. And I would like to call on Ms. Kamdani for her 2-minute statement. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you for this opportunity. It is an honor for me to represent ICC in this forum today. For those who don't know ICC, we are the World Business Organization representing the global real economy with national committees in over 130 countries and around 10,000 subnational chamber of commerce, representing business large and small and medium and micro. I'm also representing Indonesia in the Indonesian Chamber of Commerce and Industry. I would like to just share a little bit. Obviously, all COVID-19 we know have devastating impact. The pandemic is having also a big impact on our economies and our society, on both our businesses and our workers. I think the nationwide economy sector was subjected to both pressure from the supply as well and demand, market-based disruption and also regulatory-based disruption. Many women are at the frontliners of the COVID-19 response, representing 3/4 of the workers in the health and social sector. I think they are also facing firsthand the brunt of infection and mortality. Women also dominate in the service industry, a sector that is being significantly impacted by the COVID-19 outbreak. Women also disproportionately work in insecure labor. Women own mostly small businesses, which are the most vulnerable as well to the crisis. Moreover, the economic impact of the pandemic has significant on women who are most likely to be engaged in informal or low-wage activity or migrant work. And because of the gender pay gap, women are, in addition, less resilient to cope with financial blows. Now, I would like to share a little bit some of the highlights of the key priority of what ICC has been doing. So right now we're helping to bring the pandemic under control and getting the economy moving again on a resilient and sustainable footing. I would like to highlight two priority areas on how WTO and trade can help equitable access to vaccine and access to also trade finance. First, the need to ensure equitable access to vaccine and to avoid so-called vaccine nationalism. I think as the private sector representative on the ACT, a Facilitation Council, ICC has been running a broad campaign around the adequate funding of COVAX and the other pillars, and the imperative of avoiding export and other trade restriction on vaccine, components, and other medical essentials. You may be aware of a recent independent report also commissioned by ICC on the impact of vaccine nationalism on the global economy. The report shows that advanced economy have an economic as well as a moral imperative to ensure the equitable distribution of COVID-19 vaccine. We have also commissioned work by the Global Trade Alert to monitor trade restriction on vaccine component, medical goods, and food. And now we need much greater public-private cooperation. I would like to reiterate the public-private cooperation on this issue, which is something that perhaps ICC and WTO could do more on together. I know you have discussed this issue recently with also our Secretary General, John Denton. Second, I would like to highlight also on the access to trade finance, as this is key to sustainable and resilient recovery and critical to small businesses. ICC sees a significant risk of retrenchment in the trade finance market in the coming month. ICC also has been calling on the G20 to scale support for the market, for example, credit guarantees. But this agenda has attracted limited political attention to date. We believe there is an urgent need for greater collaboration on this issue, and we hope to work with you all in WTO to help accelerate policy action and practical efforts to ensure that SMEs can access trade credit coming out of the crisis. WTO, as the leading multilateral institution responsible for the international trading system, clearly has a role to play. ICC will continue to support WTO effort and also to support reform of the organization to make it as effective as possible. In this context, ICC welcomes your recommendation to members to focus on few core priorities with feasible outcomes in the lead up to the next ministerial conference later this year. Also, I would like to just close by the impact of COVID-19 on the women entrepreneurs and workers. I think it really have reshaped the global supply chain and accelerate the digitalization of businesses. This will have implications for women across the world in their roles as farmers, entrepreneurs, worker, and consumer. It may also change gender relations with households and communities. We already know that the COVID-19 is having a disproportionate impact on women and women-owned businesses, especially because they are smaller in size on average, in less productive sectors, and are less resistant to economic shocks. They are also concentrated in sectors that are hard hit by the crisis, including the tourism and retail. As micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, we are the backbone of our economies and employ around 70% of the workforce in most countries. The current economic crisis brought on this pandemic has also had impacts on people's livelihood, particularly those at the base, the bottom of the economic pyramid. So the crisis will definitely increase the pre-existing economic inequalities and economic challenges women already face. I want to just give a quick example that in the pre-existing inequalities that only 1 out of 5 exporting businesses are women-led, another that 80% of women-owned businesses have credit needs that are either unserved or underserved. And women are 7 times more likely to work in a sector that has been shut down since the crisis began. So due to COVID-19, many countries have imposed strict restriction on movement people, and this has strong also impact on consumption demand, especially for sectors like tourism, catering, hotel, entertainment, and retail. Sadly, a huge number of MSME belong to this sector, and this has definitely led to a total or partial health of SMEs businesses. So despite the sharp drop in economic activities, I think MSME need to find a way to cover expenses like salary, rent, taxes, and so forth. This is a time for us to act together, and we hope for more collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you very much for all these points and recommendations. So we are closing with one question to all panelists. I will take the same question that I gave to the DG before she left, and I will first go to Ambassador Molokome. According to your view, how can we incorporate gender into designing trade policies and how to implement them?
Well, I think that is a pertinent question, and I hope you can hear me this time.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, very pertinent. It's a pity the technology undermined our capacity to discuss fully. Look, in my view, I think the whole movement towards gender mainstreaming in whatever field, in whatever sector, has gone on long enough and has produced enough resources, practical tools that can be used to mainstream gender perspectives into different areas. I think the trade area has lagged behind, but I do think that the trade area can benefit very much from tools that have already been designed in other sectors, the economic sectors, the human rights sectors, some of the very specific concrete ways in which a policy can be made more gender responsive and sensitive. And I think the Director General referred to budgeting. Gender budgeting is now something that is very well developed as a methodology. So I do believe that the tools are out there, they exist, there are toolkits, we need not reinvent the wheel. And I think that the Secretariat at the WTO will be able to lay their hands on these. Those of us in the working group from the different countries, we can assist here in collecting best practices in different countries, where we can then use those tools to learn from each other and how to mainstream gender issues into the different policies from the global, coming down to the regional, as I said earlier, down to the national level. I think that's what I can say in very general, high-level terms, but the tools exist. And I think we can move very speedily without having to reinvent the wheel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Same question goes to Ambassador Benedetti Zelaya from El Salvador.
Thank you very much, Anush. And basically, I would like to stress on one point made by Shinta. I think we need to strengthen very much the public and private cooperation in this area. I also believe that we must enhance the national dialogue on the issue of trade and gender, and definitely at the international level, enhance the work of the informal working group. I think I have a very specific example of how we have been trying in El Salvador to introduce gender on our internal policies. I would like to share that since October 2020, the government of El Salvador, together with UNDP and over 20 business sectors, we have been working on a technical standard for a system of gender equality management, which was launched earlier this month. Through this standard, gender equality conditions in the workplace will be promoted. So this is a very practical example on what we are doing in El Salvador on this area. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Same question goes to you, Ambassador Aspelunt.
Yes, thank you. Like the Director General so very well explained, that this is a complex question and it will take a long time to give a full answer to it. And that's actually what we are trying to find out in the working group now. And as has been said here, the pandemic has really, I would say, revealed the remaining economic inequalities and that they have been exacerbated by the pandemic. And same goes for my country, Iceland, where women has been harder hit. The sectors that women are dominating have been harder hit. And for that, it's important to keep the trade open. And that's what we are trying to do here at the WTO. And we can if we include it in our trade policies thoroughly and very well, then trade will improve the lives of women. And that's what we would aim at. And this can be done with a broader, enhanced international cooperation. And when I'm mentioning broader and enhanced, I'm underlining that we need to cooperate also with other international organizations, the private sector, and other stakeholders when it comes to trade and gender. And this is a cross-cutting issue, and for members to include it in their trade policies is important, like we have been working on now in the Trade Policy Review Body, where members have already voluntarily started the conversation. It's always very important for us to deepen our knowledge and to exchange best practices, what we are doing now in the working group. First, we need to understand the problem. We need to find out what others are doing to improve their trade policies to include women more in trade. And gathering and sharing their best practices is what we are doing now. And when we understand better how things should be done, we can start to include it in our policies. And I'll leave with that. Thank you. Thank you, Anush.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I would like to also ask that question to Ms. Kamdani. What do you think government should do? How do you think government should integrate gender into their trade policies?
Yes, I think clearly the policies, the gender mainstreaming is important in bringing into the trade policy. We have seen what we mentioned before, the disappropriation women into trade and some of the challenges that faced by women. So I would like to perhaps highlight 4 items. First, I think regarding women as part of the supply chain, I think somehow when we talk about how women businesses can part of supply chain, this has to be the opportunity has to be also there for women to be included as part of the supply chain. And I think this somehow needs some policies that will bring in opportunities for women to be part of the supply chain. And also I've seen a lot of, from the trade aspect, is we know how digitalization and e-commerce also has played a big role in terms of bringing women businesses, especially during this pandemic. So I would say a lot of the capacity building of how to improve women in trade in terms of their skills. This is also something that government, I think, needs to really pay attention to. The third aspect is the formalization, I think, of women businesses. I know that many of the businesses of women are right now more in the informal sectors, and how we can also assist women to be for the businesses on the legal formation and so forth to be easier for women businesses as well. And the last is the financing. I think whatever we do when we talk about gender and trade, we also need to look at get access to finance for women businesses. And this is something I think is very, very crucial. And we know that a lot of women don't get the same opportunity as male. And I think the gender equality aspect is very, very important in this area as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So with these comments, I would like to close this session for International Women's Day. I would like to thank all the speakers that were here today with us for their sharp remarks and illuminating arguments. I would like to apologize to everybody, to the speakers, and to all the attendees about this technical glitch that we had. It has disrupted the whole event, but I think the main points were there and have been put on the table. And hopefully we will meet again in real, this time without any technical glitch. And in any case, rest assured that you will be hearing from the WTO on women's empowerment and on substantial and concrete solutions to support the livelihood of all women across the globe. Thank you very much.